Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project with me, Chris Akers, where we talk about politics, sports, arts and culture, and anything else we can think of. And today I've got a wonderful guest. I've been trying to get someone to talk about arts and culture and Hollywood and basically mess that it's in at the moment. And I've been a fan of this person for a while. Their name is Baggage Claim, and they're here to discuss that with me now. So hello to you.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I'd say it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Before we continue with the rest of the interview, can you say a little bit about yourself, when you started to become a YouTuber and what you talk about?
Sure, absolutely. So I became a YouTuber back in 2020. It was something that I've been kind of playing around with the idea for a while. And with everything happening with the lockdowns, it seemed like the perfect time. I'd chosen to leave a job at that time, and I was in quite the transition. So I decided to start something called Baggage Claim. And my motivation for that channel was really to talk about different issues happening out in the world that people could glean lessons from personally. So whether that could be anything that, from analyzing a movie or a TV show, or even just a public drama playing out, and using that as motivation to answer some complex questions. And the whole desire from this is that if it helps people claim their own emotional baggage and unpack it and understand themselves at a deeper level by seeing certain examples out in the world, then I'll be very happy with that accomplishment.
Oh, good, good. And speaking of doing baggage, you're going to do a lot of baggage right now, um, especially in regards to Hollywood, because there's a lot of talk about woke Hollywood and artists cancelling themselves, and just it being a whole morass of just emptiness in Hollywood at the moment, and not just in film but also in TV. Where did he start with all this morass that Hollywood's in at the moment and the quality of film going down?
I think it started. I would really push it back all the way from the advent of social media and how much Twitter has taken over the public sphere, and it has given rise to some pretty intense activism. And I think there's a level of activism that's really, really needed and necessary to move people forward. But this overarching, I would say, theme of the last couple of years in Hollywood has become about representation. We should have representation. We should have as many voices, as many diverse voices as possible represented on the table. And I think while that desire is good, it can come at the cost of a meritocracy, which I think most of us would reasonably look at jobs being achieved by people and saying, oh, it's because of their merit, right? There are always instances of nepotism, there are instances of bias that always play into anything that happens in the world. But most of the time, people are arguing for jobs and getting positions because they're doing good work. There's work that they can point to and say, this is why I deserve to be here. And that has really gotten swapped out for trying to bring in the right type of checked boxes into the roles. And I think if that is the motivation of any production company versus providing jobs to the most capable person, then what you're going to end up attracting are those activist types. And that those personalities now coming into these roles of creators, writers of these movies, of these TV shows, what they're going to do is they're going to talk like activists. And activism is a very one-sided type of conversation. It's not a discussion. It's not a sitting down, looking at things from all angles, trying to understand the nuance of the situation. Instead, it's actually screaming, right? And it's screaming at the top of your voice at someone you believe to be purely evil. That's the perspective that activism really takes, right? They don't think, oh, maybe this company has reasons for doing whatever it's doing. So there's no discussion. So you're going to have this activist mentality boiling very complex issues down into one single line statements and screaming that. And that then now going from that perspective into writing movies, TV shows, all of which actually require a lot of thought. It requires a lot of thought about motivations, about cultural issues, about social issues, about what drives a human being to do something. And I don't think those writers really have that perspective coming into it. So their motivation, well, before I say that, I think the way writers used to write, their whole desire used to be about writing stories that brought people together. You bring people together and you carry them through this journey, whether it's by telling a story that they've never heard of before, or something that inspires them, moves them, makes them emotionally, collectively feel something.
Yeah.
I think that's the true value of a movie or a good TV show. But with activist-based writing, it's not like that. It's not about unification. It's about the activism. So it's about a lecture. And nobody likes to be lectured unless you're paying for college tuition and you want to go in and be taught something. Most of the time, we really resist that. If our parents are lecturing to us, our siblings are lecturing to us, we're like, okay, calm down with the lecture. We don't like that because it makes us feel like we don't have a voice in that conversation, that we're just being told things from a very one-sided perspective. And that's what the writing has really looked like. I think that's one of the biggest analogies I draw, is that this is not a story that this is not a story that makes you feel. It's just, you just feel lectured, and that's it. I think that's where we're at right now with the industry.
So with that in mind, do you think that, because one of the goals I imagine with film and TV is actually escapism, that you're just watching something that's after a hard day at work, etc. Do you think that particular aim of films has basically just dissipated?
Absolutely. I think even right now, I think the state we're in culturally, none of the TV shows really feel escapist, even if they're good. I think we're in this really tumultuous time where a lot of the stories are shifted towards more like a feeling of darkness, and there's like a desolation or frustration that seems to be coming through even in good stories. But I think, yes, there isn't that feeling of escapism. Lord of the Rings, they did the release, right? They released it across a lot of theaters in America. I don't know about where you are, but as a celebration of the anniversary, and it beat out so many new releases, and it was a limited release, and it earned far more money. And I think it says a lot about how starved people are in that feeling of escapism, because it is a fantasy. Yes, I think that's a big part of it, but it's a beautifully cultivated story, beautifully told. But I think it has an element that's really missing right now in modern media, which is a feeling of being inspired and having characters that are noble, that no matter what, they do the right thing. Even if they struggle to do the right thing, they do whatever it takes to defeat evil. And I think that story structure is really missing. And I think that's why it doesn't feel like escapist, because you never know in current media if the good guy really wins, or if you even feel like the good guy deserves to win.
I watched an old film recently, Long Kiss Goodnight, which is a brilliant film, but obviously it's with Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson, but it's one of those films where it actually didn't do well at the time, but it seems to gain a reputation as a really good film. And she basically, for those who don't know, she plays a teacher who has these memories and then ends up becoming an assassin. It's almost like Born Before Born in many respects, but the way that character grows is commendable. And you look back at it now and you think, I wish we had a film like that. And I'm just thinking the way men and women are depicted in film, it's almost this very rigid, oh, if you're a girl boss or if you're a weak man, and there's no depth to the character at all. And again, is this part of the activism you talk about to try and depict this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that nuanced perspective on men and women has really disappeared. I think there's no room for positive masculinity. And I mean the word masculinity, because if you watch something like Dungeons and Dragons, which was a fine movie, it wasn't particularly woke, I didn't think. And in fact, I found it entertaining, but I don't think they know comfortably how to represent strong males anymore. So they had to make the two men in it really weak, right? There was one character that was male character that was he was a side character and he was kind of strong, but I think there's this perception of that if we represent men as strong, stoic, powerful, that people are not going to like that. So women get to keep that role now. They get to be the stoic ones. They get to be the strong ones. They get to kind of dictate what's happening. And then the men get to inherit all the strengths that we used to put towards women. And that, I think, is the hardest part about writing today, with what kind of what's the word I'm trying to think of, but like what blowback you might receive on Twitter is that if you say that men are physically stronger than women, that in itself is like this massive debate that'll just destroy the person who said that, right? It's like you can't acknowledge that men are physically stronger. You can't acknowledge that women are more emotional. That seems to be like a bombastic statement now, that you can't acknowledge that women do have emotions. So there's this weird like line we have to constantly toe where we can't acknowledge the differences. So when we're writing the characters, we end up the people write them in a way that feels unnatural to what we know down in our soul.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the blowback people might get. I'm just wondering if that's a reflection of society as a whole. If you look at, say, someone like Oliver Stone, when he made Platoon, he actually fought in Vietnam. And yet a lot of the young writers now, I wouldn't say have had any major suffering at all. And I'm just wondering, is that part of the problem, that you get these people now who have grown up in relatively easy lives? Obviously, there's some people have hard lives for whatever reason, relatively easy compared to 30, 40, 50 years ago. And therefore, as a result of having easy lives, I can't really have a reference point to write with.
Yeah, and I think there's this desire for everybody should feel seen, because I do think we're in this unprecedented time where even though people feel like the world is ending and things are really terrible, I think everyone's always felt like that. It's just that now people can talk more about it across the world. Before you only really knew what was happening in your corner of the world. Now you know what's happening everywhere. So everything feels very doom and gloom. But really, if you look at the state of the world, people are in much better state than ever in our civilizations of the world, ever, right? A lot, trajectory for like women have it the easiest that we've ever had it, right? Childcare, even having the thought of having birth, giving birth now is so much safer than it used to be. Or even access to food. Food is, for the first time in human history, is far more accessible. That's not the case for everybody, but for a big chunk of the world, it has become really accessible. And I think in that state, people are struggling to find meaning, because we are actually very lucky to be born now and to exist now and to be able to communicate with everybody. Like you and I are across an ocean, and we're able to talk in real time. That is there are all these ways in which we are so incredibly lucky. And yet I think people feel really lost, because I think there was a lot of turmoil in general for humans. We need to go through a lot of strife to feel like we're doing something meaningful. And I think that feeling is lost. So people are creating victimhood narratives for themselves.
Yeah.
They want to feel like a victim because it makes them feel more in control.
Yeah. And that sense of control, I don't think people understand. And I talk from my own experience. That's sometimes you need a loss of control to actually make you grow and learn how to claim back control. At the moment, especially with the arts, I don't think that's the case. I think it's just become, for want of a better word, far too easy. I mean, for me, for example, I'm the type of person who, if I see someone successful, I don't get jealous. I take notes and I look at them and I say, okay, this is how you got successful. And one of the issues I have at the moment is, because a lot of success is not based on hard work and endeavor, based on fulfilling a quota or fulfilling an identity, it must be demoralizing for certain writers who are very good, but because they don't fit a particular identity quotient, they'll struggle to get ahead in their writing.
Yeah, And I think then in those cases, they have to feel like they have to manufacture some form of victim-based mentality to get through it. But you're absolutely right that looking at another creator and using them as an example, as humans, I think the most effective way that we learn is through mimicry, right? Like, what is that person doing? Let me try to like conceptualize it in my head, and then I can reproduce it. And we get that opportunity for free off of YouTube, off of so many different platforms. But I think with true success, you have to accept that you have a hand in that, that you can take certain actions in that. But if you're getting a lot of benefits, let's say for just belonging to a certain identity, I think it starts to create this very negative relationship in yourself, insecurities in yourself. Do I really belong here? Did I really get this job because I deserved it? And I think the only way that people can then sometimes drown that out is to really go out there and say, oh, I'm here for representation. Everything I'm doing for other people, right? This is not for me. So there's this whole desire that activists have, is to separate out themselves from it. Yeah. That, oh, this is not for me. This is for you. I'm doing this for you. See how noble I am. I'm doing this for you. And that feels very disingenuous to me.
So going back to your last point there, again, is that another additional issue, is that there's a lack of trust? And what I mean by that is, if you look at TV and drama, there seemed to be a case of, okay, we're not sure about this film, but if we can negotiate a fee in which we're going to offer you to make this film, then we'll at least trust you to make it. And there seems to be less and less of that now. Is that part of a wider picture, this lack of trust in people? And so therefore you have groups of people allocating themselves, saying, well, we'll do it for you, because really we don't trust you to do it for yourself.
Yes, I think you know a lot of the frustrations with current culture can be traced back to postmodernism, right? That belief that you and I are not talking as individuals, but rather we are just representatives of power structures. Yeah. And that you don't really exist as a person, I don't really exist as a person. So there's not that belief in that individual sovereignty, that you're capable of critical thinking. I was going to say critical drinking, critical thinking, and show up here with everything that you've experienced, and think through, hey, what fits in my life, what doesn't. Like, a common thing that I've been accused of, because I don't go with the grain of, because I'm Indian, because I'm an immigrant, and because I'm a woman, that I should be thinking in certain ways. And people, instead of saying, hey, I disagree with you as an individual, they often say to me, oh, you've internalized colonialism. And it's always this, that postmodernism really pushes people to think of people not as individuals, but just being brainwashed. And I find that deeply disturbing, that thought really disturbing, because the whole hallmark of Western society is this belief that you are an individual, you're responsible for your life, and that you should be communicated with and treated with full recognition of that sovereignty. And so this trust thing really comes down to that, is that I'm not talking to you. If I'm an activist, I'm not really talking to you. I'm talking up to the power structure that you're here and you're a puppet for. So you don't deserve intercollegiality or any kind of respect. Instead, I get to scream you down and not even give you an opportunity to speak. So there is that. You're absolutely right that there's that trust is gone in how people communicate with each other if they don't agree, at least in that group of people.
Yeah. People get surprised when I say that two of my favorite authors are Charles Bukowski and Philip K. Dick. And it makes me wonder how that translates to film, because I see certain films and it's always, say, if you're a Black director, it seems to be, for the most part, you have to make something about Black history or contemporary Black life now. And maybe that it was always the way to a certain degree, but do you think that's something that's got particularly worse?
Yes, I think so. And I think it comes back to that belief that, whenever you're sitting down with a director like that and listening to an interview with them, they often reference their Blackness as part of why they're here. And the only person that I feel like does this in a healthy way is Denzel Washington, where he recognizes what his role is in the Black community. And he talks a lot about the culture that if he is making a movie, it doesn't necessarily have to be about Black issues, but maybe there are cultural things that he wants to discuss. And so in that case, if it is a cultural thing, then he will bring in Black talent, because there's a shared culture within that group of people. Whereas with everybody else, it's like, oh no, it just feels like this desire to tick the box that I'm doing what is expected of me as someone who's in this role and who's playing this game.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking in terms of in regards to the term woke, obviously a lot of people that complain about it and so on and so forth. Obviously, I had a situation with Nike, who I can't remember the name of the person, but advertising their products as well. And I'm just wondering, do you think companies sometimes use outrage as a way of advertising, and sometimes we fall into the trap of just complete outraging, which in a sense promotes the product even more?
Yes, and it's that term, right? Fan baiting is this desire to fan bait, and that it'll create enough of a buzz out in the world that people will almost hate watch it.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't understand why companies think that that's going to work, because it's like you're valuing becoming a spectacle versus actually creating something that's of value.
Yeah.
And in the situation that you were talking about with the beer company, it's completely backfired for them. I don't understand. I don't think they're I think the visions that these companies have is that when they engage in this kind of behavior, that they'll get clapped by so many activists that it'll drown out any kind of criticism. But I think there's also this desire to anger a certain base. Like if you listen to the VP of that company, she was explaining her reasoning behind engaging in something like this, and there was a clear disgust that she has for the types of customers that brand has attracted. She doesn't like her customers. She wants new customers. She wants different customers. So she wants to, make people angry. And I think that's the case with a lot of these instances too, is that they're okay with engaging in fan baiting because they actually hate the fans to a certain degree. They genuinely hate them. Same with Star Wars fans. They've received a lot of hatred from Disney when the episode of The Mandalorian had aired where Luke Skywalker made a reappearance, and there was a fan video of someone just watching that and crying, and he was just so moved because this was his hero back on the screen, represented the way that we wanted him to be represented, that Luke Skywalker is a hero, not this deconstruction version that they did in The Last Jedi, but a genuine hero. And this man is crying, and a Disney exec was mocking him for that. And that's the thing, is that there are people that genuinely hate their fans because it's this, again, activist mentality that I know better than you. I know your behavior is toxic, and I could list out so many different reasons why, and I have a genuine hatred for you because I don't believe that you are someone who I should even have to consort with in any form. So I'm just gonna destroy everything you love and transform it into something that you hate, just for the fun of it.
So leading on to that point, why have they decided to transform like cultural icons like a Star Wars, like a Star Trek? Why, if you're trying to get your point across, aren't they creating their own their own shows, their own TV shows? Because really, if you think about it, a lot of the studios, be it film or TV studios, a lot of them are very far left and far left activism. So they could do that if they want to, but why are they not doing that? Why are they taking established series like a Star Trek, like a Star Wars, etc., and basically inserting their own characters and making their own shows off the back of those?
I think if you don't hire for talent, but you hire for belief because of what they believe, and what they happen to believe is a very one-sided, problem-oriented activist behavior, activist viewpoint, then there isn't any room for true creation, true ability. I think to be a great artist, a great author, a great, communicator, you have to yourself be able to see the truth in humanity. You have to see, like, where's humanity dark? Where is it good? What about myself is dark? What about me? Where's there like evil in my heart? And how do I deal with that? How do I have issues and errors? And how do I participate in the world in good ways, but also in bad ways? I think that all of that ability to reflect on yourself is not something that activist writers necessarily engage in. I think activist writers really think from the perspective of someone else is wrong, and they participate in pointing out the problems, not actually participating in the solution. And they think that the solution is simply a statement, just saying it, end poverty, and that'll magically end poverty, right?
Yeah.
And or calling men toxic. Oh, that'll change men, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you truly, again, if you're engaging in that viewpoint, then you have a hatred for people that don't think like you. So what better method of feeling like you've won than taking over the work of someone else and inserting your own warped mentality into it and completely transforming it so much that it's unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Right? That's the desire. It's a hijack. It's not a desire to work with it, to improve it, to elevate it. It's a hijack. And it's a hijack in the purest sense of, this is a power, like their perception is that they are engaged in a fight for power.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting. Again, we've talked a lot already about culture, and I chaired a debate recently. I'm part of this debate discussion group, and I chaired a debate recently about the teaching of history. Initially, it was in schools, but one of the points I made is that one of the most powerful ways you can teach history is actually through culture. So, for example, I imagine there's a sizable number of people in this country that know more about the Vietnam War than the Falklands War, even though the Falklands involved Britain and it was in the 80s, whereas Vietnam was in the 60s and 70s, because of the films that came out. And I'm just wondering, as much as we talk about the woke and say the damage they've done, do you think they have more of a handle on culture in regards to those who are anti-woke, for want of a better word? And what I mean by that is the woke seem to be a bit more aware of the importance of culture, whereas only recently those who are against the woke mentality seem to be didn't really see the importance of culture. Would that be a fair statement to make?
I didn't catch the last part, that the people who are against woke, what do they do when it comes to culture?
So what I'm saying is people who are woke or classed as woke, they seem to have understand the importance of culture a lot more in terms of how it can change, influence society. Whereas what I see sometimes is those who are against woke, until recently, I don't think they realized how important culture was and how important its influence was on society. Would that be a fair statement to make?
I think yes, I do agree with that. And I think you're absolutely right that those vehicles for spreading culture, like movies, like TV shows, but also things like education, right? That it, for a long time, our school systems and college education systems have been overrun by very postmodernism, woke ideology, which is why we're seeing a lot of people who have bought into that perspective out in the world and starting to really insert themselves in all aspects of our culture. And then leftist, a lot of the media is tilted towards the left. A lot of the movie creators, even Netflix is trying to fight back, but even then they're very much tilted towards the left. Everything has shifted, and there's also this ability that the leftists, like extreme leftists, have of being very vocal. I think if you are on the right side in the American traditional sense, if you're conservative, your perspective most likely is to say, it's a free country, let them live their life, I'm going to do my thing, right? So there's a reason why protests are not that common from people who are conservatives versus people that are liberals. And I think it is this belief in I'm going to go out and just make the most of what's possible for me, because I don't really care how someone else is living their life. Whereas leftist ideology really believes that I do care how someone else is living their life, and I want to change how they think about how they should live their life. So that's why a lot of the conversations between the two sides end up becoming about freedom versus security, and even when it came to the mask mandates, shutdown mandates, vaccines, everything has come down to that breakdown of pushing for more safety versus pushing for more freedom. So I think because the right has been so hands off, it has allowed the woke ideology to really run far more rampant. If in civilized society, like in America, like in the United Kingdom, if you're just engaged in a normal conversation and someone looks at you and says, "Hey, you're a racist," that is a very hard thing to hear, right? Because we're we're both very multicultural societies, and that's a very huge accusation to levy against someone. And often that is so uncomfortable that it starts to make people really quiet. And that's actually really what's happened over the last 10 years, is that reasonable voices have become really quiet because of the fear of being called sexist, racist, misogynist, whatever other ist you want to put on there. And so that's also what's really turned the tide in favor of woke discussions, and them taking over a lot of institutions, taking over HR departments. In the startup world here in America, the things were people were far more open to just speaking honestly. Now everybody's become really quiet. The HR departments run it, right? Diversity hires, pushing for bias training,
Unconscious bias training.
Yeah, there you go. So there have just been so many ways that they have taken over culture. And I think only now we're waking up to that idea and saying, wow, like how do we even out the scales? And I think YouTube has been a really good arm in evening things out, where more and more you have voices kind of standing up and talking. And that's a way that conservatives or people on the right, or even moderates, are really showing their power, is by watching those videos. Because that doesn't mean they have to come out and say something, but those people are getting a lot of views, which helps at least give some indication that that most people don't agree with woke ideology, even though it seems like it, because of how loud those people are.
So to extend that, do you think, because you talked about conservatives being quiet and then now starting to watch videos, but do you think people are finally starting to gain more courage? Because I'm just blunt, I'll just say I don't think too many people have not had the actual courage to say what they think when against a minority. Do you think the tide is starting to turn in that respect?
Yes, and I think the biggest coup in that has been Elon Musk acquiring Twitter, because he really did. His entire justification for it and desire for it has been to protect freedom of speech. And I know for a fact that Elon Musk, whoever he disagrees with, he doesn't care about that. He respects their right to speak openly. And I think that's where that's what's really bolstered the right, and people have returned to Twitter that had been banned from it. And I think I feel less worried about getting deplatformed, because before there was this monopoly on that, right? I could get deplatformed from YouTube, from Facebook, from Twitter, from Instagram, and there you go. I have lost any opportunity to substantially speak to my audience and even leverage their help at all. Whereas now, at least if I do get deplatformed off of one of those other services, I still have Twitter as an avenue to communicate with people and ask for help, because often in these situations, you can be powerless. No matter what kind of viewership you have, you can be powerless. And that's one great way that leftists have really shut down right voices, is by deplatforming. And I think so. I do think the tide is turning. I think more and more you're seeing creators that are moderate, that are right, and like moderate voices, especially because of the podcast platform, have become more and more common. And I think that's wonderful. And Joe Rogan is a great example of that.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan is another example of like a cultural gain for the moderates.
Yeah, definitely. And you talked about power there, and one of the biggest powers anyone has is financial. But what annoys me is you get a lot of people who complain about these companies doing these campaigns, but yet they'll still pay to buy their products from these people. And I'm just wondering, you've seen people like who are stepping out of that and creating their own companies, like Eric D. July with his Rippaverse comics as well. I think Critical Drinkers trying to be getting funding for a film as well. In terms of the arts, do you think that's the way to go forward? Because it seems to me too many people have been complaining and begging at the same time. So in other words, they'll complain about the Oscars being woke, but they still want to win the Oscar. And I'm just thinking, guys are just hypocrites, just go away. So do you think that's the case in regards to creating our own companies? Because that's one of the good things with YouTube. If I wanted to do this on the TV, the amount of gatekeepers and hoops I have to go through would be a nightmare. Same with you. So do you think that's one way in which people are fighting back, is they're creating their own products, be it comics, films, theatres, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned the Critical Drinker. He had that Kickstarter campaign. He's written books over many years, and now he's crowdfunded his first ever movie. And I think the Critical Drinker is more and more movie industries, the people that are part of the movie industry are recognizing him as an important voice. And I think that's really the transition of the world, is where there used to be a few voices, whether it came to fashion, whether it came to movies, the news, TV shows, that would say, hey, let's create something that everybody will like. And that's why you had TV shows like MASH, that's like the most ever viewed finale that we'll ever have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now everything's gotten democratized. Everything has come down to a level that feels a lot more intimate, if I can use that word in this context, because
Yeah.
we used to have movie stars, but now we have influencers, and everybody has their own set of influencers that they look to. And I think that's the important part, is that concept of influencer has only been about taking photos, selfies and like vacation photos, but really influencers are like, who are you looking to get ideas and have discussions? And so if that's something that people have this desire to be out there, to speak up, to really share their viewpoint, then they can do that by leveraging one of these channels. And whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube. And someone who went through that, like a lot of people sometimes, even in my life, will ask me like, why YouTube? Why did you want to do this? And for a long time, I was having these rants and discussions with myself, or, my brother had to listen to it, or my husband had to listen to it. Like someone had to sit and listen to it. And I'm like, and I'm just, ranting away. And then I'm like, wow, why don't I just go and talk to people about it? Like, that's the whole point, is that I want to have a conversation with other people. And YouTube is a great platform to do that. And luckily, there's such a deep connection you have with your audience. Consistently, the audience is validating you and telling you, yeah, I do want to hear this. I want to hear more about this. I have a question about this. So it helps guide you down that path, where it turns into this conversation, where it forces you to really up your game, right? Make sure you're well informed and you're speaking truthfully and honestly. And so I think it's a great tool to really democratize that whole process of communicating with audiences.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, since starting this podcast, I think it's just been wonderful talking to people like yourself and from sports as well. Again, that's one positive of social media. However, I'm wondering if a negative of social media is as far as the movie stars are concerned. Because again, if you look back from films from up until, say, 10 years ago, the movie stars seem to have a certain gravitas. Whereas now, I'm not saying I can't act, but that gravitas seems to have gone, and I'm wondering, do they talk too much, in the sense that they expose themselves too much, and so therefore we almost know everything about them. They don't have the allure that they used to have.
Yes, I think the biggest misunderstanding in Hollywood has been, what is the purpose of a movie star? There are some people who understand that idea really well, and I would put Tom Cruise in that category. And then there are people who don't understand it at all. I think a lot of times when people blow up, because the work involved in being an actor is so disproportionate to the kind of adulation that you can get. And let's use Johnny Depp as an example, right? That the work, I'm not saying he did not put in a lot of work. He did put in a lot of work, let's say, for Pirates of the Caribbean. And a lot of people in the behind the scenes confirmed the fact that he, Captain Jack Sparrow really was him workshopping with the writers and coming up with all the various things that made him such a lovable character. But that took him from being a kind of known actor to this worldwide phenomenon where people are now trying to break into his house. He can't even go down the street to grab coffee. He has to silo himself and create this like glass bowl situation to keep himself safe. So I think what happens is that for a couple of months of work on the Jack Sparrow, on the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, his life got completely transformed. He gets turned into this multi-million-dollar, man, and extremely well known. And I think the disproportionality, because of the global reach of everything, which didn't exist before, right? Movie stars in the 50s, they lived better than the average person, but not that much better, right? There wasn't this like vast difference in how they lived. But now everything is so global. So if a movie does well and it does really well, then it does really, really well. That means you are now so separated out from the average person and the lifestyle of the average person. And I think for a lot of people, for movie stars, it's hard to understand how to justify that for themselves. And so some people understand it. Tom Cruise looked at it and said, you know what, my role in this world is to make sure that audiences are happy. We create movies they enjoy, they keep coming back, something that thrills them, something that excites them. This is for the fans. And you can see that in all of his work, and that's why all of his work does really well. And he continues to enjoy superstardom. But then other people say, you know what, I have to lend my voice to a bigger thing, right? So that's where the activism comes back. And so that's what, Amber Heard tried to do, right? She wanted to lend her voice to the Me Too movement. And instead she ended up, exposing her own bigotry on that front. So then, even Jennifer Lawrence, she's become so vocal for women's rights and things like that. And what it starts to do, I mean, I understand there's definitely nobleness in doing that. There's definitely honor in what they're trying to do, but I think it starts to break the what's the best word for this? Like it breaks that gravitas, I guess, what you're talking about, like that perception that people have is that they love you and they've given you all this fame because of your character and what you represent in that character. And the role that movie stars play is that they have to jump from character to character. So if it becomes too much about them as the person, it's not about your characters anymore. It's about you. It's about your personality. And then you are alienating a lot of people with the kind of things you have to say. You're calling men toxic, like Jennifer Lawrence does all the time. You're hating on your fans, saying if a fan comes up to me, I go, no, you get incredibly rude with actors. Then it just breaks that whole relationship, because at the end of the day, it is a contract. And then and if you don't show value for that contract, then it's going to destroy it.
So we've kind of been very negative on Hollywood and all the woke stuff. I know, but I do like to be hopeful as well and build for the future. And I do think one positive that's happened is certainly the rise of foreign cinema, especially from Europe and especially from South Korea over the last
Sorry,
10,
you say that again?
yeah, sorry. So I think one
Rise of what?
positive over the last 10, 15 years has been the rise of foreign cinema, what you call foreign cinema. So film and TV from places like Europe in general and South Korea. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think there are some benefits to, like, if one group of creators end up really floundering, like large creators like Disney, Marvel, if they're floundering, it really does create a lot of space to watch other people, and where they're not so fixated on identity politics, they're fixated on creating really good work. Just literally on Sunday, from my morning to evening, I ended up binging Beef, which I know it doesn't really count as foreign cinema, but it definitely has like a completely different, I would say completely different perspective on, like the common line in the show is Western psychology doesn't work on Eastern minds, is something they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
kept saying. Because I don't know, have you seen the show?
No, I've not seen a show.
And I won't give anything away, but you should definitely watch it. And I was just completely blown away by that. It was just so good. I watch a lot of Indian movies because I do think Indian movies are going through their renaissance over the last 10 years. They're just producing incredible movies and TV shows. There's so many streaming platforms where good writers can go and pitch great scripts. So I think in that sense, weirdly, it is its own renaissance. It's more that we're seeing the fall of things that culturally normally we would all look at it and say, oh wow, the new Star Wars movie's coming out. I think that's what's lost a lot of its energy, and instead it's moving to more of these smaller indie films, or if you could even call it indie, but backed by Amazon Prime or Netflix or all these different platforms. And I'm seeing such a great positive creativity coming out of that.
So going back to the negative political stuff.
That was great though. We were positive for a little bit. I do worry sometimes. I'm like, am I too negative? Because I'm actually a very positive person. So you gotta cut it out sometimes. Yeah.
But you talked about activism, and I imagine that extends to the critics, because obviously you got the whole thing with Rotten Tomatoes, and there seems to be a gap between the critic store and the audience store. Do they tend to belong to the same group as the critics, whereas before, now there used to be a little bit of a gap between the critics and the actual movie stars and the movies they're critiquing?
I think that whole system has lost the trust, coming back to the trust aspect of everything. There have been some very clear indications of large companies like Disney protecting their IP by insisting that critics really rant and rave about things. When Lily Singh's TV show had come out, which it was just such a disaster, a little late with Lily Singh. One of the things she touted was that she had 100% critic score, whereas the audience score was like in the absolutely tanked because people just really didn't like it. And I think that the lack of trust there is from that discrepancy, that where the trust used to be, do the critics understand the audience?
Yeah.
Are they because they're speaking for the audience, right? But I think we are in that age of deconstruction in every possible way, that any institution that you could look to and trust, and then you say, well, but they're lying to me, right? They're lying. They're telling me this show is really good, but is it really, right? A couple of years ago, we had Roger and Ebert, and they used to have a show where they, critiqued movies. And if they liked something, people trusted their perspective and went out and watched it. I think now that's shifting to someone like the critical drinker, where if the drinker recommends something, people will go watch it. Nerdrotic, because he's so embedded into nerd culture. If he reviews something and he likes it, then people will go watch it. So I think, again, it's getting broken down out of an institutional thing that everyone can look to everybody has their own set of people that they trust, influencers that they trust, that then encourage them. But I think what will likely happen from that, at least for the foreseeable future, is that we won't have these massive hits anymore. We won't have these like massive blockbusters, because it's unlikely that truly people feel like they can go to one movie and everybody's going to like it. I think it's going to be like everybody has their own set of things they really like.
Okay. And I'm just wondering, just going back to the whole issue of woke Hollywood again. Again, people don't like it, but I'm just wondering, do you think there's a danger of the backlash actually going too far? So we go from almost woke and identity politics to almost going the other end, where we're almost discriminating because of like a person's identity, and that's reflective in the actual dramas and books and TV that it's produced.
I think it's something I think about a lot, because I want to make sure I'm being responsible in my criticism of female representation. I criticize it a lot, and a lot of people get very angry with me for that. But my whole reasoning for it is that I don't want female representation to be born out of narcissism, which is what I see today. Is that, if I had a child and I constantly said to that child, hey, you're perfect, and no one should tell you anything, no one can criticize you. If someone criticizes you, you should really doubt their motivations. And you don't need to learn the rules of the world. You don't need to learn the rules of the game. You don't need to think about how you could improve and meditate on that. If I taught my child all those things, I would be turning that child into a narcissist. And that's not a good way to live. And that's a lot of the modern representation is really tilted towards that. So that's my criticism of it. But I always like to use positive examples of females being represented, because it's like we can't just be negative all the time. We have to look at like what works, what it's not just born out of this desire to hate. And what I've noticed, because I'll go and check in my comments, because I do have a lot of people, both men and women, they'll comment. And I mean, whenever it comes to a man commenting on one of my videos, yes, there will always be instances of people being misogynist, but it's a small minority. Most of the time, their true love for a female character who's powerful will be rooted in Ripley. I mean, Ripley is like a god to them, to so many people. And so I see that there's this frustration with the current state, but this love for what traditional feminism was doing for the last 40, 50 decades, that it was giving us really great female characters. There's so much love for the Natasha Romanoff in the original Avengers films. There's so much love for Sarah Connor. There's so much love for so many. Even one of my favorites is Rita Vertasky from Edge of Tomorrow. She's just such a great character. In my last video, I talked about River Tam from Serenity and Firefly, and people just love that character, even though she's, in a lot of ways, she's not just a powerful character. She's broken in so many ways. She's vulnerable in so many ways. I think the blowback of shifting back is impossible in today's world, because of how much women have come shoulder to shoulder with men. I think that's just ingrained in even in men. I don't think men want women to go back to some form of subservient kind of behavior. I think what men genuinely want is women that they can understand and effectively negotiate with, which is something that I think they're really struggling with right now. I think men don't know what to be without being called toxic men. And I don't think men and women don't know how to have effective relationships on a whole right now. I think there are a lot of people figuring it out, obviously, but I think that this is like the big worry. And it seems to be culturally represented really well in the movies that are coming out, where the men and women don't know how to get along. There's a lot of adversarial representation of men and women behaving with each other, where the men are idiots and the women keep calling them idiots, is the perspective. So I don't think that there'll be this massive pendulum swing back. I do sometimes, though. Are you familiar with trigonometry? The
Yeah, I know
podcast?
trigonometry, yeah.
Yeah, they had a content creator, just Pearly Things.
Yeah, yeah.
She's
I saw
huge.
the episode, I saw the interview, yeah.
You saw that, and so that's what I found a little surprising, where she was, arguing for, like, oh, women should lose the vote, and then when I went in the comments, everybody was just angry with the hosts for being too hard on her. And here she is talking about how women shouldn't be allowed to vote anymore. I'm like, what reality have I stepped into that they're focusing? So I do wonder about that I do think that, just Pearly Things is really good about protecting, representing the male perspective in a lot of conversations. I think she does a good job of that, but I do think she does say things that are really bombastic, and that's what makes her viral in a lot of ways. So I don't know how much she 100% means it, but I just thought, okay, we have to just be careful about stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Just a couple more questions, and actually one's just to lead on to what you said. You talked about female characters. Do you, and I'll say some male characters as well, but with female characters, do we think we show enough of the maternal side of them, or still showing the strength? So if you look at Ripley and Sarah Connor in Aliens, Ripley was obviously looking after the little girl in Youth, and so that was still her maternal side, but she was still strong. And obviously Sarah Connor with her son John. Do you think there's a fear of showing that side because it's almost seen as weak, or encouraging women just to be seen as that?
Yes, I do think there's a fear of showing that. The only recent film, I'm sure there have been many others, but the one that I can recall was in A Quiet Place,
Yeah.
where in the first movie, and it gives me chills kind of thinking about it, but in the first movie, Emily Blunt's character says to John Krasinski that she says it's really important to protect the kids, and she says, if we don't protect the kids, what are we doing? And I think that amount of strength to choose to, in such a terrible time, to choose to give birth, right, which is such a difficult act, a very courageous act. And I think that's the type of strength that we don't talk about anymore. I'm glad they share that in the movie. But I think there's this frustration that modern feminism has, that the only way for women to show their strength is by prioritizing another life.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue that's the same thing we ask of men. We value men that can prioritize someone else. I think if you actually end up living a life just for yourself, you're not going to have a very meaningful life. I think meaning comes from building this strong sense of community, serving other people, whether it's your friends, whether it's your parents and your children. Mm-hmm. That doesn't have to come at the cost of everything to do with yourself or anything like that. But I think so much of maturity happens when people have children, and then they see that it's not about me anymore. It's kind of like that line from Interstellar, where Coop says to his daughter that, when you kids were born, your mother said to me that we're just ghosts now for our kids. And I think that strength in being okay with not letting it be about you and prioritizing the next generation is true masculine and feminine strength in their own way. And I think we are in this time right now where it's all about the self-esteem movement. It's all about you. It's like, I'm going to have a day for me. This is, I'm the main character, or, self-care. It's really about self-care and mental health. Now, I'm not saying those are not important things. They are, but it can all go to an extreme. Just like only thinking about other people can go to an extreme, only thinking about yourself can go to an extreme. But we are in the era of self-esteem, where then the priority that people want to to make is their career. And one of the reasons that we've always pushed men to prioritize their careers is because at the end of the day, it's to serve the family, right?
Yeah.
Go out and make money, not for yourself, but for the family. Take care of your family. But when we say that to women now, it's become like, no, it's about you. You know, you're a boss, you know, boss bitch, you're a girl boss. Like, it's about you. Even in your career, it's about you. So I think we've turned the narrative too far into that self-sufficient, narcissistic perspective. Not self-sufficient, I shouldn't say, self-centered, narcissistic perspective, that we've actually lost out on what makes women incredibly powerful and strong, which is in the context of family and motherhood. But we're very uncomfortable talking about that now.
Yeah, oddly so. Oddly so. I don't
Yeah.
know why. And
Yeah.
I know you're a positive person, so we'll finish with a positive question. So we'll go for the next 5 years. What are your hopes, both in terms of society as a whole, where we are, and also the arts and culture and where we will be? Not just in terms of no more wokeness, but just in general, other terms as well.
Yeah, I think honestly, this is something I've been thinking a lot about, because there's a general frustration that I have with the where things are. And if I had to describe them on a macro level, I would say that there was a feeling of unity before globalization, where everybody in a particular country could feel like they were mostly on the same page because they had a shared culture. And because of globalization and so much movement that's happened between cultures, and because of this desire to be very open to other cultures, we have now lost that feeling of unity in our desire to be accepting. Now, acceptance is not wrong, but the problem is that it has come at the cost of unity. Like, the culture that the United Kingdom has is very different from the culture of the US, but even then it's very similar in a lot of ways. So those two cultures can communicate effectively. But US's culture and India's culture is very different. And there are a lot of Indians that are living here. And we are no longer encouraging assimilation. We're instead encouraging people to stay as they are. But the problem is that if you're in a country and you're not united culturally, it's very hard to figure out where to go, which is why it's very easy for things to feel so polarized. And what I mean by culture, like, it just as an example might be, you know, how do you communicate with each other, right? Do you yell? Like, in Indian society, it is considered acceptable to yell. In American society, it's not, right? That's just like a micro thing. In Indian society, the top priority is your family. It's the family's reputation. In American society, the top priority is the individual. What does the individual want? There's a reason why when an American couple gets married, the parents say, we just want you to be happy. When an Indian couple gets married, the Indian parents say, no, it's not about happiness, it's about the family. There are all these little things that are so different between cultures. So then how do you negotiate macro level issues? So what I hope for, because I think this level of discordancy is also what's being reflected in movies and TV shows and things like that, because I think we are arguing about what should be the future of our culture. We're actually loudly arguing about that. And so I'm hoping for some form of these issues, some way that, like, we start to hash out these differences and start to come together. What's going to bring us together, and get us to recognize that, okay, we agree culturally that some things are good versus, let's say, another culture's behavior, right? Like, can we say that we can be accepting and really kind people, but can we start to look at things and say, oh, you know, we should be doing things that way. We should be communicating with each other that way. We shouldn't be yelling. We should be talking openly. We should value speech. We should value, disagreement and allow for that. So I think that's what I'm hoping for. And I'm actually hoping that the TV shows and the movies start to represent that unity and herald that into our lives.
It has been an absolute pleasure interviewing you. Just finally then, where can we find your work? What's the name? Obviously no name of your channel. Are you on any other platforms, and do you do any writing alongside it?
Yes, so you can find a majority of my work is all on YouTube, and you can find me on Baggage Claim there. And on other platforms, Twitter, you can go to Baggage Claim 11. So bad, but yeah. And on Instagram, I'm Baggage Claims with an S. But yes, I have some videos coming out. My primary focus on my YouTube videos. Everything else is kind of ancillary. So if you're ever curious about my work, YouTube is the best spot.
Okay, I will leave a link to your YouTube channel in the description. But as I said, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you so much. And thank you. These were very engaging questions. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You take care.